You're standing in front of a fire. It's 700,000 years ago. There's a dead animal a few feet away, and every instinct in your body is telling you to do what every animal before you has always done: eat it raw, right now, before something bigger and hungrier shows up and eats you instead. And then, somehow, someone doesn't do that. Someone looks at the fire, looks at the meat, and thinks, wait, what if I did something incredibly stupid and put the food in the flames instead of my mouth? This is the story of how humans discovered cooking. Not recipes, not restaurants, not the guy who insists on telling you exactly how he sous vides his steak at a dinner party. We're talking about the very first time a human being took raw food and deliberately transformed it with fire. And why that single decision might be the reason you have the brain you're using to watch this video right now. Because here's the thing nobody tells you. Cooking isn't just a convenience. It isn't just something we do because raw food tastes bad. Some scientists believe cooking is the single most important technological leap in the entire history of our species. More important than the wheel. More important than writing. Possibly more important than fire itself, because fire without cooking is just a heat source. Cooking is what turned fire into fuel for evolution, and the evidence for this is genuinely wild. Let's start with the obvious question. What were humans eating before cooking? The answer is simple and slightly horrifying. Everything. Raw. Meat, tubers, roots, leaves, insects, whatever they could catch, dig up, or scavenge. All of it eaten exactly as nature made it. No seasoning, no fire, no softening. Just raw biological material chewed with enormous effort and digested with even more effort. And that word, effort, is the key to this entire story. Because raw food is expensive. Not expensive in money, expensive in energy. Raw meat is tough, dense, and packed with connective tissue that your jaw has to grind through for what could be literal hours a day. Raw plant matter is often wrapped in cellulose, a compound your digestive system can barely break down at all. Chimpanzees, our closest living relatives, spend somewhere between 5 and 6 hours a day just chewing, not eating chewing. That's basically a part-time job with no lunch break and no pay. And the pay is you might still starve because raw food gives up its calories reluctantly. Now here's where things get interesting, because at some point one of our ancestors accidentally solved this problem, and the leading theory for how it happened starts once again with a wildfire. Lightning strikes dry grassland, fire sweeps through, animals die in the blaze, roots roast underground, and afterward, hungry scavengers walk through the burned landscape looking for anything edible. And somewhere in that ash, someone picks up a piece of meat that's been sitting in the heat and eats it. Because when you're starving, you don't ask questions, you just eat. And it's soft. It's easier to chew. It tastes different, richer, somehow more satisfying, and their body, without any understanding of chemistry or biology, just knows this was a good decision. This is the accidental cooking hypothesis. And much like the accidental smoking discovery your ancestors also stumbled into around the same fires, it suggests our relationship with cooked food may not have started as an idea at all. It may have started as scavenging that happened to taste incredible. But accidental exposure and deliberate cooking are two very different things. And this is where the archaeology gets genuinely fascinating. The controversial but compelling evidence comes from Wonderwerk Cave in South Africa, the same site that gives us our oldest confirmed evidence of controlled fire, dated to roughly 1 million years ago. Researchers found burnt bone fragments and ashed plant remains deep inside the cave, in a location where a wildfire could not have reached naturally. Someone brought fire inside, someone maintained it, and where there's a maintained fire deep in a shelter, food is very likely being cooked over it, not just kept warm beside it. Here's the anthropologist who put this whole idea on the map. Richard Wrangham, a primatologist at Harvard, proposed what's now called the cooking hypothesis. His argument is bold. He suggests that cooking wasn't just a helpful addition to the human diet somewhere along the way. He argues cooking is the reason we became human at all. Here's his logic, and it's honestly one of the most elegant chains of reasoning in evolutionary biology. Cooking breaks down tough proteins and starches before they even reach your mouth. It essentially performs digestion in advance, using fire instead of stomach acid. That means a cooked meal delivers dramatically more usable calories than the same meal eaten raw, for less chewing and less digestive effort. Less effort, more energy. That's an evolutionary jackpot. And what do you do with a massive new surplus of energy that your body doesn't have to spend on grinding through raw fiber for 6 hours a day? You redirect it. Specifically, Wrangham argues, you redirect it toward the single most energy-hungry organ in the entire human body, the brain. The human brain, despite being roughly 2% of your total body weight, consumes about 20% of your resting energy. That is an absurd amount of fuel for one organ. No other primate spends anywhere near near that percentage on brain function. And no other primate has a brain anywhere near the size of ours relative to body mass. Something had to pay for that upgrade, and Wrangham's answer is cooking paid the bill. There's fossil evidence that lines up with this timeline in a way that's honestly a little eerie. Around 1.8 million years ago, a new hominin species appears in the fossil record, Homo erectus. And Homo erectus is different from everything that came before it in some very specific, very telling ways. Their brains were significantly larger than earlier hominins. Their guts, based on the shape of their rib cages preserved in fossils, appear to have been noticeably smaller, and their teeth and jaws were smaller too, less robust, less built for grinding through tough raw material for hours on end. Bigger brain, smaller gut, smaller jaw, all appearing together, all around the same window of time that controlled fire starts showing up at hominin sites. That is not a coincidence you can easily wave away. Think about what a smaller gut actually means biologically, because this part rarely gets explained well. Your digestive system is also incredibly expensive to run. It needs constant blood flow, constant energy, constant maintenance, especially when it's processing large volumes of tough raw material. There's a concept called the expensive tissue hypothesis, which argues that the body has a kind of energy budget, and if one organ shrinks and frees up energy, another organ can grow to use it. Shrink the gut because cooked food needs less processing power. Grow the brain because you finally have the energy surplus to afford it. It's an internal trade, one organ subsidizing another, made possible entirely by a technology as simple as putting food near flames. Now, is this settled science? No, and it's important to be honest about that. The cooking hypothesis is influential, but it's also debated. Some researchers argue the timeline doesn't perfectly line up because widespread confirmed controlled fire use doesn't clearly show up in the archaeological record until somewhere between 400,000 and 800,000 years ago, hundreds of thousands of years after Homo erectus first appears with its bigger brain and smaller gut. If cooking caused the brain growth, shouldn't the fire evidence be older, not younger? This is a real gap in the theory, and honest scientists sit with that tension rather than pretending it doesn't exist. It's entirely possible that other factors, like eating more meat generally, using stone tools to pound and tenderize food before fire entered the picture, or shifts in social cooperation, also played a role, and that cooking was one major driver among several rather than the single cause of everything. Science rarely hands you one clean answer, and the honest version of this story includes that uncertainty. But even with that debate, the raw calorie math is not up for argument. Researchers have run direct comparisons. Rats fed cooked meat gained more weight than rats fed the exact same raw meat on the exact same amount eaten. Studies on humans eating strictly raw food diets today, even nutritionally careful raw diets, consistently show subjects have a harder time maintaining body weight and often experience irregular reproductive cycles because raw food, even good raw food, simply does not deliver calories as efficiently as the same food cooked. Cooking isn't a lifestyle choice at that point. It's a calorie multiplier, engineered by nothing more sophisticated than heat. Let's talk about the plant side of this story too, because meat gets all the attention, but cooking may have mattered just as much, maybe more, for something incredibly unglamorous: starchy roots and tubers. Raw starch is genuinely difficult for the human body to digest. Its molecular structure is tightly packed and resistant to your digestive enzymes. Cook it, and heat physically unwinds that structure, making the starch dramatically easier to break down and absorb. Some researchers argue that tubers, not meat, may have been the true nutritional foundation that let early human populations survive in environments where hunting was unreliable, and that cooking those tubers is what unlocked their calories in the first place. A root that's basically useless raw becomes a genuine feast once it's sitting in hot ash for 20 minutes. There's also a survival advantage to cooking that has nothing to do with calories or brains, and it's one that gets overlooked constantly. It kills things that want to kill you. Raw meat, especially scavenged meat that's been sitting around, carries parasites, bacteria, and pathogens that can cause serious illness or death. Heat destroys most of that. Every early human who cooked their food before eating it was, whether they understood it or not, running a basic sterilization process. Every group that developed a habit of cooking meat before consuming it was very likely getting sick less often, dying less often, and surviving to raise more children than groups who didn't. That's natural selection, working through something as unglamorous as food poisoning. And it's a quieter, less dramatic driver of this whole story, but a genuinely powerful one. And then there's the part of cooking that has absolutely nothing to do with nutrition or survival at all, the social side. Because here's something that changes everything about how a group of early humans spent their evenings. Raw food doesn't need to be shared around anything. You can grab your piece and eat it wherever, whenever, alone if you want. Cooked food needs a fire, and a fire is a fixed point. It doesn't move. Everyone has to come to it, sit near it, and wait together for the food to be ready. That waiting period, that shared, unavoidable pause before eating, is something no other primate really has in the same structured way. way, and researchers argue it may have been one of the earliest forces pulling human social life into the shape we'd recognize today. A cooking fire creates a schedule. It creates a gathering point. It creates a period of enforced togetherness multiple times a day, every single day, for the entire existence of the group. That's not just dinner. That's the invention of the family meal, hundreds of thousands of years before anyone had a table to eat it at. And once you have a group of people sitting still, together, in one place, waiting for food, with nothing urgent to do but wait, something else becomes possible that raw scavenging on the move never allowed. Conversation, storytelling, teaching, passing down knowledge about which plants are poisonous, which animals are dangerous, where water can be found in the dry season. Some anthropologists argue that the campfire, powered entirely by the need to cook, may be one of the earliest classrooms our species ever had, long before anyone invented language sophisticated enough to call it teaching. So when did all of this actually become a daily habit rather than an occasional accident? The honest archaeological answer is that undisputed widespread evidence of habitual cooking, meaning fire used constantly at multiple sites by multiple groups as a routine part of daily life, becomes clearly visible in the records starting around 400,000 years ago at sites across Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. Before that, the evidence gets sparser and more contested, exactly the kind of gap you'd expect, because ash and burnt bone, unlike stone tools, don't preserve well over hundreds of thousands of years unless conditions are unusually good. Absence of evidence, once again, is not evidence of absence. It just means fire is a much harder thing to fossilize than a spear point. Here's the honest summary of what we actually know. Something happened somewhere between 1 million and 400,000 years ago, where humans went from occasionally encountering cooked food by accident to routinely, deliberately, reliably cooking their meals over controlled fire. That shift changed the shape of our skulls, the size of our guts, the structure of our jaws, and quite possibly the raw processing power of our brains. It changed how much time we spent chewing versus how much time we spent thinking, talking, and teaching. It turned eating from a solitary, constant, exhausting task into a shared, scheduled, social event built around a fire that everyone had to sit near together. Think about that the next time you're standing at a stove waiting for water to boil, mildly annoyed that dinner is taking 12 whole minutes. Somewhere in your evolutionary past, that 12 minutes of waiting around a heat source with other people, watching food transform in front of you, may be one of the reasons you have a brain complex enough to feel mildly annoyed about it in the first place. You're not just making dinner. You're doing something your ancestors did every single day for hundreds of thousands of years. Something so fundamental to what a human is that we genuinely might not have become human at all without it. So, would you have eaten it raw, or would you have waited by the fire? Let me know in the comments. Until then, see you soon.